Shalom, and welcome to our show, The Crossover, a show aimed at bridging gaps between Jews and Christians. Today we have a real special guest, Dr. William Bean, and he's going to be discussing the most important archaeological find in the 20th century, the Dead Sea Scrolls. In fact, he is one of the few people who have exact replicas of some of these scrolls.
For nearly 2,000 years, Jews and Christians have been divided. But now, God is calling for the healing of past hurts and the comforting of His people. Discover how God is prophetically uniting Jews and Christians across the world today on The Crossover. And now, here are your hosts, Mitch and Rosalie.
Dr. Bean, welcome to The Crossover. We're glad
Thank
you
you very
came
much.
to be with us today.
Yes.
The purpose of The Crossover is to bridge gaps between Jews and Christians. And you're teaching at a university in California. And what are you doing to help bridge those gaps?
Well, basically, what we've been doing over the years is trying to break down the walls of anti-Semitism between the Jews and Christians in the Department of Comparative Religion. Lately, we've been working with one school in Illinois that has received a $250,000 grant from the Shapiro Foundation. And this is unbelievable. A Christian school receives a grant from a Jewish foundation.
Unusual.
And I'm on the board of this group that's working together with the Department of Judeo-Christian Studies. So we think it's a wonderful opportunity.
You are here today, primarily, Dr. Bean, to share with our viewers on the Dead Sea Scrolls.
That's correct.
And, we're in Houston. I remember when the Astrodome it came into creation, people thought that was the eighth wonder of the world, a football stadium under a roof. This discovery you've come across has a little bit more significance and depth, the Dead Sea Scrolls. What are they, and where were they discovered? Tell our viewers that maybe have never even heard of them.
Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered along the Dead Sea. They were not discovered in the Dead Sea, as some people believe, but along the Dead Sea in caves in about the year 19, well, the publication that they were discovered was about 1946, but they were discovered before that particular period of time. A young shepherd was looking for a stray goat or one of his sheep, and he came upon this cave, and the original cave had an opening that's about 5.5, 6 feet off the ground, and he threw a rock through that opening and heard a cracking sound. And later he came back about a day later with his cousin Musa, and a few of the boys helped him lower himself down into the cave, and it was at that time he discovered about quite a few jars that were in this cave. And that's the beginning of the story of the Dead Sea Scrolls, this great discovery.
So a shepherd boy near the Dead Sea, which I think is the lowest point of the earth, just as a
yes,
reference
it is.
map.
Very, very
there,
dry.
Right. So tell us about these scrolls. How far back are they taking us in time, and where was the area that they were discovered? What's so important about the community they were discovered in?
Well, let's take the Isaiah scroll. This scroll predates Jesus, or it goes back to Second Temple period, by 167 years. We have some type of conjecture to believe that this scroll was brought over from Babylon. We don't know where it originated in Israel. It ended up along the Dead Sea in a jar. Possibility, theoretically, someone like Jesus could have read from that scroll. And so it's a very important scroll because it's very similar to what we have today in the book of Isaiah. And it's a Genesis.
Word for word.
Yes, basically.
In 160 years.
167 years before
Jesus,
Jesus, right. And so this particular scroll is one of many. You see, as these group of individuals that are called the Essenes. Now, some scholars believe that it was not the Essenes who were at this particular community, but some of us believe that the Essenes did live there. But still, this group of people, as they would join this community, would bring their various scrolls with them. And the majority of them came from the priesthood in the temple after the Maccabean revolt. And it was during this particular period that John Hyrcanus was the high priest. They didn't like that because he was an illegitimate child. He was a Pharisee. The Pharisees didn't like it. They called his attention to it, so he switched over to the party of the Sadducees. And he wasn't of the line of Aaron or the order of Sadok. And so many left, and they formulated these communities, and they went, basically, a group of them, over 200, went down to the Dead Sea area.
So he wasn't with the line of Aaron. They sort of formed their own sect there to study.
Right.
They were priests. They
To
knew
study law.
to study the Torah, to study the law here.
The reason they were called out into the desert as John the Baptist, a voice crying out in the wilderness from Isaiah, was to go and to study law. That was their main emphasis.
As a priest, okay. And was bringing up John the Baptist, how did he play into this? Was he part of the Essenes, or he was obviously back in that era, and some people say he was an Essene?
Well, basically, first of all, the Essenes were Jews. A lot of people hear the word Essene and they think of some radical branch off to the side, even though they were very conservative in their beliefs. They wanted to preserve the order or the lineage of Aaron. However, today we have a tendency to believe that John the Baptist was raised by the Essenes. Some of us do. The reason for that is, remember, Zechariah and Elizabeth both were of the lineage of the priesthood.
Yeah, that was his parents.
That's his parents. And they were quite elderly when he was born. So we assume that they probably gave him to the Essenes to raise, because the Essenes, the men, there were no women in the colony, except we found a few bones and skeletons of women, maybe 2 or 3 in the Dead Sea area. They would just bring in young children. These young children would be raised, and then eventually they would come into the community of the covenant. So we feel basically John was one of these young children. Zechariah felt that he was going to pass away, gave his son to the Essenes to raise, felt quite comfortable with that, probably had sympathy for them. There was a colony of the Essenes on the Mount Zion area, and there's nowhere in the Gospels do we find John as a young child. And being a descendant of a priestly family like that, he would have probably been raised in the temple area, studied under the sages in the temple. However, nothing is mentioned of him. The first mention we have in the Gospel of Luke of John is when he's out in the wilderness, and it says that God manifested himself to John toward John's movement. We call it a movement. And we feel that John probably left the Essenes because he felt that the kingdom movement of the Lord was going to be different than studying law. And another reason we believe in this is because of his baptism. Up before the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, more or less Christian baptism, which is mikvah. Christian baptism, we thought, was off of what we call the Jewish...
Mikvah is...
to immerse yourself
in
water.
Okay.
And before that, we felt basically that Christian mikvah, as they used in those days, was like the Jewish proselyte baptism. There were a lot of God-fearers like Cornelius and so forth. And to proselyte into the Jewish faith, you would baptize yourself, and we thought that maybe Christian baptism came from that, until we read the Rule of the Community from Qumran, which is a sectarian document, and we found out that they would immerse themselves daily for purification, for eating, for prayer, and so forth, but they had a baptism where you would come into the community, you would become part of the covenant at a certain age, and this baptism was a one-time baptism. So we feel that the baptism of John came from that particular concept of that one-time baptism.
Same baptism we do today.
And it's quite interesting about that, because just let me elaborate just one more step on that. The baptism is, the mikvah is where you would go in and by yourself you would immerse yourself under the water, and you were baptized in the name of the person who witnessed it. For example, Paul said, I baptized some of you, but were any of the rest of you baptized in my name? And John used this style of baptism, and even to this day there's a church called the Church of St. Joseph in Nazareth that has a mikvah that simulates this baptism of going into the mikvah. There's a mosaic floor where you cross the river, like crossing the Jordan. You mikvah yourself, you come back across the river and enter into the land, into the covenant. Very similar to the Essene covenant.
What John did. Interesting. The back to the scrolls here. They were found in when they were found, they had more than one language. Apparently, they come in Greek, they come in Hebrew, and they come in Aramaic.
That is correct. 90% of the scrolls are in Hebrew. what we call Ivrit.
What language were the Essenes speaking back in this?
The Essenes, we didn't know until the discovery of the rule of the community. We have the Damascus document, the rule of the community, the War Scrolls, that the Essenes stated that they spoke the holy language. And the holy language in the Talmud means Hebrew.
Hebrew. So that was the primary language.
That was
of
the
day.
primary language that they were trying to speak because they wanted to go back into the purism of Judaism.
Right.
And 90% of the scrolls, including the scroll of Isaiah, is in Hebrew.
Is in Hebrew. So today, Hebrew is still spoken, Greek is still spoken. Aramaic, is that still spoken?
Oh yes,
anywhere?
there's Aramaic. And the Hebrew that's spoken today is called modern Hebrew. Now the rest of the scrolls were in Aramaic, a small percentage, and a small percentage in Greek. But we believe that Jesus probably knew Greek, spoke Aramaic, and probably used Hebrew in his teaching.
Okay. And we'll come back to this a little bit later about the importance of getting the, because really what's being done here is the like Isaiah, you're now able to translate, I think the Bible that you have here, you were sharing,
Yes.
the Tanakh, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, right? Is that correct?
Well, this is the whole
Old
yes,
Testament.
it's called the Tanakh.
Why don't you share that with us, the importance of that and the scrolls versus Bibles of today?
All right. This Bible is called the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible. It was written by 3 scholars that are working on the Dead Sea Scrolls. Basically, these scholars went back to all the known writings of the Dead Sea Scrolls. 90% of the Bible has been found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So they went back and they translated from Hebrew into English, bypassing Greek, but from Hebrew into English. And so this particular Bible is the oldest known Bible translated for the first time into English. I mean, up until 1945, the oldest copy that we had of the Bible was the Masoretic text.
How far back was that?
Yes, it's called the Codex Leningrad. It dates back to 1008. Now we're catapulted back 1,200 years earlier.
Wow.
So we have copies of the Bible, like the last book of this Bible is 2nd Chronicles. This is the Jewish Bible, the Torah, the Nevi'im, the Ketuvim, which is called the Tanakh. And 2nd Chronicles, we have a copy of 2nd Chronicles within 75 years of the original extant that was written.
We will be right back.
I'm Jim Becca. I've been a journalism teacher for many years, and actually I wrote my first newspaper story in 1973. And I've seen the world change a whole lot in that time, covering a lot of different stories. But one thing that upsets me a little bit, and this is what I teach my students, is that truth can never be bested by falsehood in the public arena. But what happens when so much of what you see in the media is not the truth, and it's overbearingly, blatantly bad or anti-good? And that's why I was really concerned. That's why I think that the crossover can be a powerful instrument in reaching people, because it's actually proclaiming the truth, the positive side of a lot of different things, and reaching out to people.
For nearly 2,000 years, Jews and Christians have been divided. But now, God is calling for the healing of past hurts and the comforting of His people. Discover how God is prophetically uniting Jews and Christians across the world today on The Crossover. The Crossover exists to communicate to the Jewish community that there is a growing group of Christians who love them unconditionally. The focus of the Crossover program is to promote a greater understanding of the differences and similarities between Jewish and Christian customs, history, and theology, while encouraging a closer walk with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. As a second-generation Holocaust survivor, Rosalie's Jewish heritage includes parents who were protected from the Nazis by Christians. Yet for more than a decade, Mitch and Rosalie searched for meaning in life in the New Age movement. But after returning to their Judeo-Christian roots, they discovered God's purpose for their lives: to rebuild bridges between Christians and Jews. Now through TV, radio, the internet, speaking engagements, the healing room, and print and video resources, they are reuniting Jews and Christians in fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Join Mitch and Rosalie as they tackle tough topics and welcome dynamic guests on The Crossover.
They're one of the few organizations that actually understands the background of why Jesus did what he did, because they're from a similar background, and that's what the world really wants at this particular time.
For more information on The Crossover and The Crossover Project, contact Rosalie Jerome at 832-287-5057 or visit us on the web at www.thecrossovertv.org.
Lord God of Abraham, Isaac and Israel.
Welcome back to The Crossover.
I know when these were discovered, they must have been tattered, they must have been blurred, tell us about the condition that they were in.
Well, basically, all the scrolls now, the 7 major scrolls were in very good condition, but a majority of the scrolls would just be like shoe leather. We couldn't even read them.
Now, they were on
Leather, yes.
parchment anyway.
And so we felt that we needed to publish all the fragments. There's 15,000 fragments, along with volumes, like 600 to 800 volumes. I don't know the exact amount there. However, we felt we should publish them. So we received permission, and the foundation was organized to publish all of them through Oxford University. This has been almost completed,
Per volume.
but they're going to be used by the academia all over the world. Now, the fragments that we couldn't read, we received a call from NASA, the space program,
Sure.
and JPL in Pasadena, which does a lot of their work, had a photographer who said, I think we can help you read all these fragments. We have a process called microspectroimaging that we use in satellites, where we can shoot down from a satellite and take a picture of a plate on an automobile. And how we do that is that we're able, with this radio frequency, to differentiate between the heat that the raised letters and the paint generates, and differentiate between that and the heat of the background of the license plate. So we had them do a few fragments, and they zeroed in on them, and they were able to differentiate between the heat of the ink and the heat of the parchment, and now we can read every fragment. It's unbelievable.
So you said it was like shoe leather. I mean, you
It's
couldn't
just
read
like if you
anything.
have brown shoes, or if you take a piece of leather and maybe wash it and throw it in the washing machine, even if you were to have an edge that was bent over, and if you would move it, it would break, they could shoot through that.
Phenomenal. And a big smudge would be just, you can
It's
see
perfect.
through that.
Perfect.
So how far into the translations were you before JPL came to you with this great
Well,
discovery?
this has been going on since the 40s. And basically, what they were doing, a lot of the scholars were scotch taping pieces together. You'd look at one piece and you'd wonder, well, does this go with this piece? And you're talking 15,000 fragments.
Right.
And so the way
Jigsaw
that
puzzle.
we got around that was DNA. Through the University of Manchester, they were able to, what we call a signature. Once they had the signature, it's easy to do. And so now, through DNA, we can tell if this little fragment came from the same animal as this little fragment
Because of the DNA.
because of the DNA. And then through computer generation, we can bring those fragments perfectly back together.
Wow. Wow.
It helps immensely.
Oh, that's incredible. So technology is bringing us back to ancient of days here, bringing it back to life.
I think it's God's way of letting this happen in this period of time, because we do have the means now to read all these.
Let me ask you this, Dr. Bean. There's so many fragments, and besides the scrolls, etc., there were some non-biblical books also that have been
Right.
many non-biblical
Right.
books. What importance and significance have they been to the validity of the Bible? Are they congruent with it? Are they helping understand the customs or culture better? Or
Right.
how do they play?
But we have like the Damascus document, the community rule, the manual of discipline is a very important document. They're all sectarian. They help us understand the culture at that time. And then another one that was taken in the 1960, it was discovered in 1967. The Israeli government knew that the cobbler had it in a shoebox, but after the 67 war, they went in and they took this away, and later they, of course, paid for the document, but it's called the Temple Scroll. Now this, we have to realize that up till now in scholarship, before 1945, scholars would look through the eyes of Midrash writings, Jewish writings, and look through the eyes of maybe 14th century, 13th century, 12th century, 11th century authors. Now we are thrown back into a time like the Temple Scroll where we can see through the eyes of someone living in that period of time who might have been sitting on the Mount of Olives looking at the Temple of Herod and writing about the third temple.
Wow.
It's unbelievable.
So there must have been scriptures, I would think, that were missing that have now been rediscovered, and you mentioned here Psalms 145. Is that an example of?
You know, there's many scholars that, you know, today, I won't name them, that are trying to distract from the Bible, say that Jesus didn't say this, he didn't say that. What a lot of us are running into, especially those of us that are in New Testament research, is we're finding scriptures and also in the Masoretic text that were not in the Masoretic text, which was dating back to 1008, the earliest copy, right. And we're saying, now what do we do? Psalm 145 in this Bible, verse 13, has a perfect example. Psalm 145 is what we call an acrostic psalm. It's like you start each phrase or each sentence with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet for memorization. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, Tet, Yud. Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Samik. The noon is missing. Now, why it's missing, we don't know. However, it's in the Septuagint. We knew it existed. But very few people, especially the Jewish people, you know, they just don't trust this Greek translation. So it's not in the Masoretic text. Why it's missing, I don't know. However, we have found Psalm 145 in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we have found this noon verse. And here's what it reads. Your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and your dominion endures throughout all generations. 13 would have, where it ends up, the kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and your dominion endures throughout all generations. Blessed be the Lord, and blessed be his name forever and ever. God is faithful in his words and gracious in his deeds. Do you find that in there?
Not at all.
And there's that missing verse.
That's
now here we have a verse written 2,000 some years ago that tells us what that missing verse is. Now the question is, what do we do with it?
Okay, what do we do with it?
Well, the NIV Bible, of course, picks up on it, and anything that's found in the Dead Sea Scrolls like that, they'll place that in there. Other Bibles will footnote it, like the New King James, and other Bibles will footnote that. But there's a perfect example of how what's important here is that this is in defense of the Bible. It's saying the Bible's not valid. I mean, we're finding verses that are valid, that are in Hebrew, dating back before any written documents that we had up until 1945.
Absolutely.
And that's a beautiful verse.
Absolutely.
The Lord is faithful.
And so what you're saying too is then that the NIV has taken the translation right from the scrolls without footnotes, etc., like some of the other Bibles have done. And Jerusalem Bible too, is that what one?
Yes, the Jerusalem Bible does that, and some of the others. There's another verse, Isaiah, what is it, 53.
11?
11. And why don't you read that to me? This is a very important verse.
Yes. He shall see of the travail of his soul and shall be satisfied. By his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities.
Now this Bible, in English, the missing part is in italics. And this has been found, it's right in this Isaiah scroll that we have here. It's been found in Isaiah B, a second scroll. And we found a fragment in Cave 4 that has the same verse. And it says, out of the suffering of his soul, he will see light. Or, in Hebrew, find satisfaction, and through his knowledge, his servant, the righteous one, will make many righteous, and he will bear their iniquities. The word light is missing in our Bible. Now, what's interesting about this word light from a Jewish perspective and from a Christian perspective, we have two perspectives here. The Jewish perspective, basically, when it speaks in Genesis of God creating the light, you'll find that this particular verse, it's verses later that he creates what we call the sun, the moon, the stars, and so forth. So in Jewish Midrash, they refer to the light as the royal Messiah. And in Christianity, we would look at that as the Messiah. That he, who's he, God will see the light, see the Messiah. So from the Christian point of view, you can look at it, this speaks of the Messiah. From the Jewish point of view, this speaks of the Messiah.
Well, we're going to cover more of that in our next segment with you, in
Right.
the New Testament, etc. In closing here, since we're out of time, I'm just curious on your, personally speaking, Dr. Bean, what is it when, you've come across this and you've got to study these scrolls and be part of the Dead Sea Scroll Foundation and share this around the world? What has this done to affect you personally in your relationship with God or your faith walk or just really your destiny?
Well, I consider myself an evangelical. I'm a Christian. I've studied Hebrew. And I feel that through the Dead Sea Scrolls, that it has proven to me how valid the Bible is. I have never found anything to distract away from my belief in the Lord. As a matter of fact, it's helped me augment my belief. No New Testament fragments have been found. There's some conjecture on whether Mark had a small fragment that was found, but I don't believe that. But I do see throughout the Tanakh, as we call it, Christians call it the Old Testament, but I'd like to call it the First Testament. The Tanakh, I see many things, word syntax and so forth, of how it augments even what we call the Second Testament, or Christians call the New Testament. I have never found anything to distract from my faith, just to augment
Just
my
to
faith.
increase it,
Right.
yeah. And I'm sure now many people around the world the same, since you bring this to them. Well, we thank you again for coming to the crossover
you
and
very
sharing
much.
with us. And now we're going to go back to Rosalie. Thank you.
We hope that you enjoyed today's program with Dr. William Bean and the Dead Sea Scrolls. We're going to have him on our program again. For those of you who would like more information about Dr. Bean and the Dead Sea Scrolls, you can contact him at www.csbr.net. We at the Crossover are so thankful that these scrolls have been discovered and that they are being researched so vigorously, all to help validate the common book that Jew and Christians share, a book that hopefully more of us will choose to follow as our guidebook through life.
We invite you to become a Crossover partner right now by calling the number on your screen. For your monthly gift of $30 or more, you will receive the Crossover Partnership Pack, which includes a DVD of today's program. Call now or log on to our website and join the growing family of Crossover partners.